In April of 2010, a small website in New York posted a single warning. The warning was about Trey Parker and Matt Stone. It linked to their home address. It included audio of an extremist preacher calling for the death of anyone who insulted the Prophet Muhammad, and it compared them by name to a Dutch filmmaker who had been shot and stabbed to death on a public street 6 years earlier. Within a week, the New York Police Department was guarding Comedy Central headquarters. Within 2 weeks, the network had bleeped a speech about the dangers of bleeping speeches. And to this day in the United States, you cannot legally watch the original cut of the episode that started it all. That is just one of 10 controversies South Park has survived in 28 years. Tonight, every single one of them ranked from the loudest to the quietest. Welcome to East Park. Let us begin. Episodes 200 and 201, The Death Threat That Broke Comedy Central. April 14th, 2010. South Park is about to air its 200th episode. Trey Parker and Matt Stone have been making the show for 13 years at this point. They have offended Catholics, Mormons, Scientologists, celebrities, politicians, sports leagues, and entire countries. They have killed Kenny hundreds of times. They have shown a Virgin Mary statue bleeding from her crotch. We have made a sitting vice president into a clueless cartoon villain chasing an imaginary monster. And nothing in all of those years has ever come close to what happens next. The plot of episode 200 is, on paper, a victory lap. Tom Cruise has finally had enough. He has spent years getting mocked by this show, and now he is gathering every other celebrity who has ever been parodied on South Park, and he is putting together a massive lawsuit. Mel Gibson is there, Kanye West is there, Rob Reiner, Paris Hilton, every single famous person the show has ever made fun of, all in one room, all furious, all ready to sue the small mountain town of South Park, Colorado into the ground. But Cruise has a deal. He will call off the lawsuit, and so will every other celebrity, if the town can do one thing for him. They have to bring him the prophet of the Muslim faith. The boys are baffled. Cruise wants Muhammad because, in the world of the show, Muhammad has a kind of magical power. He is the one figure in modern culture that nobody is allowed to draw, nobody is allowed to mock, nobody is allowed to even show on screen, and Cruise wants that power for himself. He wants to extract it. He wants to never be made fun of again. This is not a random plot. This is the entire point of the episode. Years earlier, in 2005, a Danish newspaper called Jyllands-Posten had published a series of cartoons of Muhammad. Those cartoons sparked riots across the world. Embassies were burned. People died. After that, almost every Western media company quietly agreed that Muhammad was off limits. You could mock anyone else. You could draw Jesus on the toilet. You could make the Pope a cartoon character. But you could not show Muhammad. The line had been drawn. Not by law, but by fear. Parker and Stone hated this. They hated it because they had already shown Muhammad on their own show, all the way back in 2001, in a season 5 episode called Super Best Friends. In that episode, Muhammad was a superhero. He had fire powers. He fought alongside Jesus and Buddha and Moses. Nobody complained. Nobody rioted. The episode aired and the world moved on. But after the Danish cartoon riots, the rules changed. And in 2006, when Parker and Stone tried to show Muhammad again in a 2-part episode called Cartoon Wars, Comedy Central refused. The network put up a black screen instead. A title card explained that Comedy Central had refused to allow the image to air. Parker and Stone were furious. They felt that the network had let extremists win, and they had been waiting for 4 years to make the point again. Episode 200 is that point, made one more time. The plot, the celebrities, the lawsuit, all of it leads to a simple question. Can South Park show Muhammad in 2010? They tried it once and it worked. They tried it again and the network blocked them. So now, on the 200th episode, they are going to test it one more time. The episode aired on April 14th, 2010. In it, Muhammad is hidden inside a giant bear costume. You never actually see his face. The episode ends on a cliffhanger, with the second half promised for the following week. That second half, episode 201, is where everything falls apart. 3 days after episode 200 aired, a small group based in New York called Revolution Muslim posted a warning on their website. The post was written by a man named Zachary Chesser. It was addressed to Parker and Stone. It said that what they were doing was stupid and that they would probably end up like Theo Van Gogh. Theo Van Gogh was a Dutch filmmaker who had made a short film about the treatment of women in some Muslim countries. In 2004, he was shot, stabbed, and killed on a public street in Amsterdam by a man who left a note pinned to his chest with a knife. That was the comparison being made. That was what was being implied. The post went on. It included audio clips from a man named Anwar al-Awlaki, who at the time was one of the most wanted figures in the world for his role in inspiring acts of violence. The clips were of al-Awlaki calling for the death death of anyone who insults the prophet. And then, at the bottom of the post, there was a link. The link went to a Huffington Post article from a year earlier. That article had photographs of the home where Parker and Stone lived in Colorado, their address, their property, the home where their families lived. This was not a vague warning. This was a roadmap. The New York Police Department took the threat seriously. They increased security around Comedy Central's headquarters in Manhattan. They prepared for the possibility of an attack. The network behind the scenes began to panic. Inside Comedy Central, executives were trying to figure out what to do. The episode was already finished. Parker and Stone had written it, animated it, and submitted it to the network. The episode was scheduled to air in less than a week. What the network did next is the part that matters most, and it is the part Parker and Stone did not know about until it was too late. On April 21st, 2010, episode 201 aired on Comedy Central, and from the very first scene, something was wrong. Every time a character said the name Muhammad, the audio was bleeped out. Every time the character of Muhammad appeared on screen, he was covered with a giant black box that read censored. At first, fans thought this was a joke. They assumed Parker and Stone were making a point about the censorship of the prophet by mocking it directly. The black bar felt like satire. Then came the ending. The ending of the episode was a long speech. 3 speeches actually, given by 3 different characters. Kyle, the show's voice of reason, Jesus, who had been a recurring character for years, and Santa Claus. Each of them, one after another, stepped forward to deliver a moral, the way South Park episodes have always ended. The boys learn something. The audience learns something. The episode resolves. But on April 21st, 2010, those 3 speeches did not air. The audio was completely bleeped. For nearly 30 seconds of screen time, characters moved their mouths and nothing came out. The episode ended in silence. The next day, Parker and Stone posted a notice on the South Park Studios website. The notice explained that the censorship was not their decision. It was not part of the joke. Comedy Central, without telling them, had inserted the bleeps. They had covered the speech. They had done it after the episode was already finished and submitted, and they had done it without permission from the men who made the show. A few years later, a copy of the original uncensored speech leaked online. A user on a website called 4chan had figured out that the uncensored version of the episode still existed on Comedy Central's own server. They downloaded it, they posted it, and the world finally got to see what Kyle was supposed to say at the end of episode 201. The speech was about exactly what was happening. It was about the goo that Tom Cruise had been chasing the whole time, the magical power he believed Muhammad had, the immunity to ridicule. Kyle's speech said that there was no goo, there was no magical power. There was only one thing that gave certain people that immunity, and it was not magic, and it was not divine. It was the threat of violence. Kyle said that throughout the whole story, the characters had wanted to show things they were not allowed to show. The reason they were not allowed to show those things had nothing to do with respect. It had to do with fear. The willingness of certain groups to threaten people with harm. That, Kyle said, was the only true power. And the lesson? The lesson the show had been building toward for 2 whole episodes was that terrorizing people works. That was the speech Comedy Central bleeped. That was the message that was silenced. The episode that was meant to be about the danger of giving in to violent threats was itself silenced by a network that had given in to violent threats. It was, in a way nobody could have written better, the perfect ending. Not the ending Parker and Stone wrote, the ending the world delivered. The fallout was immediate and massive. A poll by Zogby International found that 71% of Americans disagreed with Comedy Central's decision to censor the episode. Only 19% agreed. Nearly half of those who disagreed said they disagreed strongly. The general public, across political lines, saw what had happened and rejected it. Major newspapers ran columns about it. Michael Kavanaugh of the Washington Post wrote 4 words that became the headline of the moment: "The terrorists win." Mike Strobel of the Toronto Sun pointed out that Revolution Muslim was a tiny group, maybe half a dozen people, with no real power and no actual ability to carry out an attack. They were, in his words, half a dozen wannabes. And yet a major American media company had folded to them completely. A small website post had silenced one of the loudest voices in American comedy. Jon Stewart, who hosted The Daily Show on the same network, devoted 10 full minutes of his show on April 22nd, 2010 to defending Parker and Stone. He talked about the hypocrisy of the threat. He pointed out that the people making the threat lived in America, enjoyed American freedoms, used American social media platforms to spread their message, and yet wanted to take those freedoms away from someone else. He was furious. And he was right. Zachary Chesser, the man who had written the original post, was eventually arrested. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for, among other things, threats and providing material support quote, to terrorists. Episode 201 has never aired again on American television. It was pulled from Comedy Central's regular rotation. It was removed from the South Park Studios website. It was removed from every streaming service that has ever carried the show. It was cut out of the DVD release of season 14 in some regions, despite the packaging claiming all 14 episodes were included. When South Park moved to HBO Max years later, the episode was skipped. When it moved to Paramount Plus, the episode was skipped again. To this day, in the United States of America, you cannot legally stream, buy, or watch episode 201 in its original form. There are 5 episodes of South Park that are permanently banned. Super Best Friends, the original Muhammad superhero episode. Cartoon Wars Part 1, Cartoon Wars Part 2, Episode 200, and Episode 201. Every single banned episode in the history of South Park involves Muhammad. Out of more than 330 episodes across nearly 30 years, the only line the network has ever drawn is this one. Parker and Stone have continued making the show. They have continued mocking presidents, religions, celebrities, and corporations. They have angered the Chinese government, the Trump administration, the Catholic Church, and countless famous people. They have lost cast members. They have been sued, threatened, boycotted, and pulled from networks. None of it has ever stopped them. Only one thing has ever silenced South Park, and it was not the silencing they expected. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now, this whole story raises a strange question. If the death threat was the line that South Park crossed and got pulled back from, what was the line where an entire country drew up its own response and erased the show from the map of the internet altogether? There is one episode that pushed a foreign government so hard that more than 1 billion people almost overnight lost the ability to find South Park online at all. And the country in question was not what most people would have guessed. Section 2. Banned in China. An entire country erased the show from the internet. October 2nd, 2019. South Park is in its 23rd season. The show has been on the air for more than 20 years at this point. Trey Parker and Matt Stone have made nearly 300 episodes. They have offended pretty much everyone. The fights they pick are usually with American targets. American politicians, American celebrities, American companies, American religions. But on this particular Wednesday night, they aimed their attention somewhere else. They aimed it across the Pacific Ocean, and the response they got was unlike anything any American television show has ever received from a foreign government. The episode was called Banned in China. It was the second episode of season 23, and it was the 299th episode of the series overall. The plot on the surface was vintage South Park. 2 stories running side by side. Stan, Kenny, Jimmy, and Butters form a death metal band called Crimson Dawn. The band gets popular fast. Hollywood comes calling. A movie studio offers the boys a deal to make a biopic about the band. There is just one catch. The movie has to be approved by the Chinese government, because that is where the real money is. So the script keeps getting rewritten, and rewritten, and rewritten. Anything that might offend Chinese censors has to be removed. Stan watches as his band's story gets gutted, scene by scene, until it is unrecognizable. At one point, a Chinese government official is literally standing over Stan's shoulder, erasing words from his script with an eraser as he tries to write. Stan finally realizes what is being asked of him. He says out loud that no matter how badly he wants to leave the farm, he cannot bring himself to compromise for China. And he says that anyone who does is worthless. That is the first plot. The second plot is even sharper. Randy Marsh, in his ongoing journey as a marijuana farmer running Tegrity Farms, decides to expand his business into China. He wants the Chinese market. He flies over with a suitcase full of weed. He gets caught at the border, and he is sent to a Chinese work camp. Inside the work camp, breaking rocks with a hammer, Randy meets another prisoner. The prisoner is a small, yellow, plump bear in a red shirt. It is Winnie the Pooh. Pooh is in a Chinese prison. The reason this gag works, the reason it is genuinely brilliant, is because of a real piece of Chinese history. Starting around 2013, people on Chinese social media began noticing that the country's leader, Xi Jinping, looked a little bit like Winnie the Pooh. They started posting side-by-side images. A photograph of Xi walking with President Obama next to a cartoon image of Pooh walking with Tigger. A photograph of Xi shaking hands with the Japanese Prime Minister next to Pooh shaking hands with Eeyore. The comparison spread. It became a meme, and the Chinese government did not find it funny. The Chinese government banned Winnie the Pooh. They scrubbed the character from social media. The 2018 movie Christopher Robin, which featured Pooh as a central character, was denied release in China. A cartoon bear became politically dangerous in the second largest economy economy on Earth. And the reason was that he looked too much like the most powerful man in the country. Parker and Stone took this real-world situation and built a joke around it. In the episode, Randy and Pooh become friends in the work camp. They escape together, and then, at the end, in one of the darkest gags the show has ever pulled, Randy is offered a deal by Disney executives. He can do business in China if he gets rid of Pooh. Randy lures Pooh into a back alley with honey, and then he strangles him to death. Piglet watches and cries. The episode also targeted Disney directly. In one scene, Mickey Mouse himself shows up to make sure all of his Marvel and Pixar characters are obeying Chinese rules. Mickey is depicted as a fast-talking corporate enforcer, willing to do whatever it takes to keep the Chinese market open. The message of the episode was about Hollywood. It was about how American studios, in their hunger for Chinese box office money, had quietly agreed to follow Chinese rules. They had agreed not to mention Tibet. They had agreed not to feature gay storylines that the Chinese government did not approve of. They had agreed to portray China in a positive light. They had agreed to remove Winnie the Pooh. Stan's line near the end of the episode summed up the whole thing. He says while writing the script that he now knows how Hollywood writers feel. He says in a different scene that we live in a time when the only movies American kids go to see are the ones that have been approved by China. The episode was sharp. It was funny. It was specific, and it was directly aimed at the Chinese government and its influence over American culture. The response was almost immediate. Within days, every trace of South Park began disappearing from the Chinese internet. The show had a presence on Weibo, which is the Chinese version of Twitter. That presence vanished. There were South Park clips on Youku, which is the Chinese version of YouTube, and is owned by the massive Chinese company Alibaba. Those clips vanished. There were full episodes of South Park available on various Chinese streaming services. They vanished too. There were fan pages, message board threads, and discussion forums dedicated to the show going back years. All of them gone. A search for South Park on Baidu Tieba, which is the largest online forum in China, returned a single message. The message said that, according to relevant law and regulation, this section is temporarily not open. That was it. The Chinese government had not just banned the new episode, they had erased the entire history of the show from the country's internet. This was a stunning move. American television shows get banned in foreign countries all the time. Episodes get pulled, specific scenes get cut, a whole season might get blocked in some places. But to have an entire show, every episode, every clip, every conversation about it, completely scrubbed from the public internet of a country with more than 1 billion people, that is something else entirely. That is a level of response that very few shows have ever provoked. Most American media companies, when faced with this kind of situation, would back down. They would issue a statement, they would express regret, they would maybe edit the episode for international release, they would do whatever was necessary to repair the relationship and get back into the lucrative Chinese market. Parker and Stone did the opposite. They poured fuel on the fire. On October 7th, 2019, just days after the show was banned in China, they posted what they called an official apology on Twitter. The apology was not really an apology. It was a perfectly written piece of mockery, designed to sound like a corporate apology while making fun of every corporate apology that had ever come before it. The apology started by name-checking the National Basketball Association. The reason for that was timing. Just days before the episode aired, an executive named Daryl Morey, who worked for the Houston Rockets, had posted a tweet supporting the protests in Hong Kong. China had erupted in fury. The NBA had stumbled around trying to figure out how to respond without losing the Chinese market. Sponsors had pulled out, games had been canceled in China. The whole American sports world had spent a week watching the NBA twist itself into knots, trying to apologize to Beijing without offending its American audience. Parker and Stone watched all of this and decided to take advantage of it. The apology read, in part, that like the NBA, they welcomed the Chinese censors into their homes and into their hearts. It said that they too loved money more than freedom and democracy. It said that she did not look just like Winnie the Pooh at all. It told fans to tune in to the 300th episode of the show that following Wednesday at 10 o'clock. It ended with the line, "May this autumn's sorghum harvest be bountiful," followed by a question, "We good now, China?" The apology was not an apology. It was a victory lap. It was Parker and Stone telling the Chinese government, the NBA, Hollywood, and anyone else who had bent the knee that they would not be doing the same. It was a public middle finger, dressed up in the language of corporate humility. The Chinese ban remained in place. It is still in place today. Years later, South Park is still effectively gone from the Chinese internet. Newer episodes have not been allowed back in. The show's catalog has not been restored. As far as the average internet user in China is concerned, South Park does not exist. The show has been completely erased. That is what makes this controversy different from almost every other one in the show's history. When the Catholic League protested, Comedy Central temporarily pulled an episode but eventually put it back. When Tom Cruise's lawyers threatened, the network worried but ultimately aired the content. When Revolution Muslim threatened, the network bleeped some words, but Parker and Stone were able to keep working. The damage in those cases was contained. The China ban was different. The damage was permanent. An entire country with 1.5 billion people, with one of the largest economies on Earth, simply decided that South Park did not exist anymore. And the show, in response, made the situation worse on purpose. The follow-up episode, the 300th episode of the series, was called Shots and aired the following week. It continued the China material, although less directly. The point had already been made. South Park had picked a fight with the Chinese government, gotten itself banned from the country, and then publicly thanked them for the publicity. There is something worth thinking about here, beyond the joke. Most of the controversies in South Park's history involve groups that, however angry they get, ultimately have to share a country with the show. The Catholic League can protest, but they live in America, where the First Amendment exists. Tom Cruise can threaten lawsuits, but American courts have a long history of protecting parody. Even Revolution Muslim, terrifying as their threat was a tiny organization that the FBI could investigate and prosecute. China is different. China is not bound by the First Amendment. China does not allow lawsuits to settle the matter. China does not need to negotiate with a cable network in New York. China just decided on its own terms that South Park would no longer be visible to its citizens, and there was nothing Parker and Stone or Comedy Central or even the United States government could do about it. The Banned in China episode is one of the clearest examples of the show's central method. It identifies hypocrisy, names it specifically, and refuses to back down when the hypocrisy fights back. The hypocrisy in this case was the willingness of major American corporations, from the NBA to Disney to Marvel to Pixar, to quietly accept Chinese censorship in exchange for market access. South Park named that hypocrisy on a Wednesday night. By the following Monday, the show had been banned. By Tuesday, the apology had gone out. By Wednesday, the next episode aired anyway. It is also worth noting what the episode did not do. It did not go after Chinese people. It did not mock Chinese culture. It did not lean on stereotypes about the country itself. The targets were specific: the Chinese government and its censorship apparatus, American companies that complied with that censorship, the Hollywood machine that rewrote scripts to keep money flowing. Pooh was in the work camp, but Pooh was not the joke. The joke was that a country could be so insecure about its own leader that a children's cartoon bear became a national security threat. That specificity is part of why the response from China was so total. Vague satire can be brushed off. Specific satire, naming specific things, is harder to ignore. In South Park, when it is at its best, is incredibly specific. Banned in China named names. It described methods. It explained the deal that Hollywood had made, and it predicted correctly that American audiences had not really thought about what was happening in their entertainment. To this day, the episode is considered one of the most consequential in the show's modern era. It marked a turning point in how American media talked about Chinese censorship. Other comedians began making the same point. John Oliver did a segment on Last Week Tonight about Xi and Winnie the Pooh that got his own show banned in China shortly after. Politicians began bringing up Hollywood's compliance with Chinese rules. The conversation that South Park forced into the mainstream did not stop after the episode aired. It grew, but the show paid a price for it. South Park is still locked out of the largest media market in the world. Every episode they make now, they make knowing that 1.5 billion potential viewers will not see it. That is a real cost. That is real money, and Parker and Stone, by all available evidence, do not seem to care. There is one thing left to mention. The China controversy showed something important about Parker and Stone as creators. When pressure comes from a foreign government, from a place where they have no skin in the game, they laugh and double down. When pressure comes from threats of physical harm, as it did with the Muhammad episodes, the network blinks, and the creators have to live with that. When pressure comes from inside the building, from someone they actually care about, the answer is much more complicated. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one episode in the show's history that did not get banned, did not trigger an international incident, and did not provoke a White House response. It cost the show something more personal. It cost them a friend, a man whose voice had been part of the show since the very first episode. And the people who took him away from the show were not government officials, were not network executives, and were not angry celebrities. They were members of his own church. Section 3, Trapped in the Closet, the episode that cost them Chef. To understand why this controversy hit South Park harder than any other, you have to start with the voice. The deep, smooth, soul soulful voice that opened almost every early episode of the show with a simple greeting. Hello there, children. The voice belonged to a man named Isaac Hayes, and before he was chef on South Park, he was already a legend. Isaac Hayes was one of the most important figures in American soul music. He had won an Academy Award. He had won Grammys. He had written songs that defined an entire era of Black American music, including the iconic theme to the movie Shaft. By the time South Park came along in 1997, Hayes was already a Music Hall of Famer. He did not need the show. He took the part because he liked it. He liked the boys, he liked the writing, he liked the absurdity of being a soul singer voicing a cafeteria cook in a cartoon mountain town. Chef was, for years, the warmest character on South Park. He was the adult the boys actually trusted. While every other grown-up in town was an idiot or a maniac, Chef was the one who would sit them down and try to explain the world to them. He would always end up explaining it through a song about making love to a beautiful woman, which was the joke, but underneath the joke, there was actual affection. Chef cared about the boys cared about Chef, and the audience cared too. Hayes recorded his lines for the show for 9 seasons. Then, in November of 2005, an episode aired that would end his time on the show forever. The episode was called Trapped in the Closet. The plot, on the surface, is one of the funniest the show ever did. Stan, feeling sad and confused about life, takes a personality test on the street, given to him by some friendly-looking strangers. The strangers tell him he scored very high on something called his Thetan level. They tell him he should come with them. The strangers, of course, are members of the Church of Scientology, and Stan, having nothing better to do, joins. What follows is one of the most direct attacks on a religion that South Park has ever attempted. The episode walks the audience through the actual beliefs of the Church of Scientology. It shows the test they give new members. It explains the auditing process, where members are hooked up to a small device and asked deeply personal questions. And then, at the center of the episode, it tells the story of Xenu. Xenu, in Scientology teaching, is an intergalactic dictator who, 75 million years ago, brought billions of frozen alien souls to Earth in spaceships that looked like old DC-8 airplanes. He stacked them around volcanoes. He dropped hydrogen bombs on them. The freed souls of these aliens, called Thetans, then attached themselves to humans, which is why people today suffer from various emotional and spiritual problems. Stan watches all of this play out on screen, with cartoon spaceships and cartoon volcanoes and cartoon aliens being blown up. While this happens, a line of text runs across the bottom of the screen. The line reads, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." That single sentence, those 6 words, were the most direct shot the show had ever fired. Parker and Stone were not exaggerating. They were not making things up. They were telling the audience, in plain English, that what they were watching was not a parody invented by the writers. It was the actual teaching of the church. Meanwhile, the second plot of the episode involves Tom Cruise, the most famous member of the Church of Scientology in the world. Cruise hears that Stan is the new reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology. Cruise rushes over to meet him. Stan, being a kid, says he thinks Cruise is okay, but not great. Cruise is so devastated by this lukewarm review that he locks himself in Stan's bedroom closet and refuses to come out. The rest of the town, including John Travolta, R. Kelly, and Stan's father, spend the rest of the episode trying to convince Tom Cruise to come out of the closet. The double meaning was not subtle. It was the double meaning was not subtle. It was the joke. The episode ended with Stan finally telling off the entire church on the front lawn of his house. He calls them frauds. He dares them to sue him. The closing credits of the episode list every single name as either John Smith or Jane Smith. The reason for that was simple. Parker and Stone fully expected to be sued. They were taunting the lawyers. "Come at us," the credits seemed to say. "We dare you." The Church of Scientology had a long history of suing critics. They had a reputation in Hollywood for being one of the most aggressive organizations in the entertainment industry. People in the business were genuinely afraid of them. Trey Parker said in later interviews that this was part of the reason they wanted to do the episode. They wanted to poke the openly litigious people. They wanted to see where the line was. Behind the scenes, what happened next is a story that has only become clear over the years. Tom Cruise was, at the time, in the middle of preparing to promote a massive movie called Mission Impossible 3. The movie was a Paramount picture. Paramount, at the time, was owned by the same parent company as Comedy Central, which was Viacom. Cruise had a powerful relationship with that whole corporate structure. According to multiple reports, Cruise made it known that he would refuse to do publicity for Mission Impossible 3 unless the network did something about the Trapped in the Closet episode. A scheduled rerun of the episode set set to air on March 15th, 2006, was suddenly pulled at the last minute. In its place, Comedy Central aired an old chef episode. The official reason given was that this was a tribute to Isaac Hayes, who had announced his departure from the show just 2 days earlier. The Los Angeles Times called the whole situation Closetgate. Almost everyone in the industry believed that Cruz's pressure was the real reason for the swap. Comedy Central denied it publicly, but the timing and the way the decision was made without warning made it obvious to anyone paying attention. The episode also caused trouble outside the United States. The British network Paramount Comedy One canceled a planned screening, fearing a Cruz lawsuit. Australian network SBS, in a wonderful response, announced that they had not received any legal threats and that they would, in their words, publish and be damned. A leaked internal memo from the Church of Scientology, which became public years later, confirmed that the church had considered suing the show, but ultimately decided that their legal case was too weak. So they tried other things. They tried to investigate one of the show's consultants, a former Scientologist named Mark Ebner. They tried to apply pressure through Hayes, asking him to convince Parker and Stone not to rerun the episode. They tried basically every form of pressure they had available, except the lawsuit they were so famous for. But the biggest cost of the episode was not legal, it was personal. Isaac Hayes was a Scientologist. He had been one for years. He was deeply devoted to the church, and the church, after Trapped in the Closet aired, made it clear that something had to change. For 4 months, nothing seemed wrong publicly. Hayes did interviews. He spoke about the show. He even mentioned casually that he had been fine with the episode. He pointed out that the show had mocked Christians and Jews for years, and that he had not had a problem with it. The church, he said, just had a different point of view. Then, in early March of 2006, Hayes had a stroke. The stroke was severe. It left him unable to speak properly. It left him unable to make decisions on his own. According to his son, Isaac Hayes III, who has now spoken about this publicly for nearly 20 years, his father was in no condition to be making any kind of public statement at all. He could not have written a press release. He could not have called his agent. He could barely communicate. But only days after the stroke, a public statement went out in Isaac Hayes' name. The statement said that Hayes was leaving South Park. The statement said he could no longer tolerate the show's mockery of religion. The statement claimed that there was a place for satire, but that Trapped in the Closet had crossed the line. The wording of the statement was striking. It sounded a lot like the official statements the Church of Scientology had been making about the episode. Years later, when leaked internal church documents became public, that similarity became impossible to ignore. The phrasing in Hayes' statement matched the phrasing in the church's response almost word for word. Matt Stone, in interviews going back to 2006, has said that he believes the statement was not actually from Hayes. He has said that someone in Hayes' circle, almost certainly a fellow Scientologist, wrote the statement and put it out under Hayes' name. Stone has pointed out repeatedly that Hayes had been totally fine with mocking other religions for years. He had no problem with the show until it pointed at his own. In 2016, more than a decade after the original controversy, Stone gave a long interview to The Hollywood Reporter alongside Parker. In that same article, Isaac Hayes III confirmed everything Stone had been saying. He said that his father did not quit the show. He said that his father was not in a condition to quit anything. He said that everyone around his father at that time was a Scientologist. He said that someone, and he did not know exactly who, had submitted the resignation in his father's name. In 2025, Hayes III spoke about it publicly again on social media, this time in even stronger terms. He wrote that for over 14 years, people had speculated about why his father had left South Park. He said he was setting the record straight. His father did not quit. Scientology did. The narrative that Hayes had been offended by the satire was, in his son's words, a cover story created by others. His father, he said, never got to speak for himself because his health robbed him of that chance. So now Isaac Hayes was gone from the show. The voice of Chef, one of the most beloved characters on South Park, was no longer available. Hayes died in 2008, never having returned to the show, never having spoken publicly about what had really happened at the end of his career there. Parker and Stone responded the only way they knew how, with the season opener that has gone down as one of the most savage things they have ever made. The episode was called The Return of Chef. It aired on March 22nd, 2006, just 9 days after Hayes' departure had been announced. To get around the fact that they no longer had Hayes in the studio, they cut together old recordings of his lines from previous episodes. The result is a chef who sounds like himself, but whose words are stitched together from past performances, often in slightly off ways. The audience can tell that something is wrong with him from the very first scene. In the episode, Chef has been brainwashed. He has joined a group called the Super Adventure Club, which is a thinly veiled stand-in for Scientology. history. The Super Adventure Club in the world of the show is run by men who travel the world and engage in deeply inappropriate behavior involving minors. Chef, brainwashed and not in his right mind, is now one of them. The boys spend the entire episode trying to save him. They fail. At the end of the episode, in a sequence that is as intense as anything South Park has ever animated, Chef is struck by lightning. He is impaled. He is mauled by a mountain lion. He is then mauled again, separately, by a grizzly bear. His body is broken in every possible way. And then, in the final moments, the Super Adventure Club arrives and resurrects him as a robotic figure, dressed in a costume that looks exactly like Darth Vader. The original Chef, the warm, kind, song-singing friend of the boys, is gone forever. What is left is a puppet of a cult. The message could not have been clearer. Parker and Stone did not blame Hayes for what had happened. They blamed Scientology. They blamed the people around him. They blamed the system that had taken away their friend. The closing credits of the episode dedicated to Hayes. The dedication is sincere. The episode is a brutal, public, animated funeral for a man who was still alive, but who was no longer the same. The show went on. Trapped in the Closet eventually earned an Emmy nomination, despite, or maybe because of, all the controversy surrounding it. Today, it is considered one of the great episodes in the show's history. The Church of Scientology, despite everything, never sued. Tom Cruise eventually moved on. The world did too. But Chef did not come back. Not really. The voice that opened the show every week, the warm tone that greeted the children of South Park for 9 years, was gone. And it was gone because of a fight that Parker and Stone had picked, knowing that there might be a cost, but not knowing that the cost would land on someone they actually liked. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. 20 years would pass before the show would face another controversy that hit at this kind of personal level. The next major incident did not cost them a friend. It did, however, involve the President of the United States, the parent company of the network, a $1.5 billion deal, and an animated cartoon penis with eyes drawn onto it. And it all happened in a single 24-hour period in the summer of 2025. Section 4. Sermon on the Mount. A sitting president's White House issued an official response. The summer of 2025. South Park has been off the air in terms of new traditional half-hour episodes for more than 2 years. The show has been making occasional longer specials for streaming, but the regular weekly run that fans remember has been on hold. Behind the scenes, things are messy. There is a corporate war happening at the parent company. There is a merger that nobody can figure out. There is a fight over streaming rights that has involved actual lawsuits. Then, in the second week of July, 2 things happen on the same day. And the way they connect to each other is part of the reason this controversy belongs near the top of any list. The first thing that happens is a deal. On July 23rd, 2025, Paramount, the company that owns Comedy Central, announces that they have signed a new agreement with Park County, the production company that Parker and Stone run. The deal is for 50 new episodes of South Park to be made over the next 5 years. The total value of the deal is reported at around $1.5 billion. It is one of the biggest contracts in the history of television. It guarantees the show, its creators, and its production team a level of financial security that almost no other animated series has ever had. 10 hours later, the second thing happens. The season 27 premiere of South Park airs on Comedy Central. The episode is called Sermon on the Mount, and the episode, which Parker and Stone have just signed a $1.5 billion deal to keep making, spends its entire running time tearing apart the company that just signed that deal. It tears apart the President of the United States. It tears apart the network's recent business decisions. It even tears apart the merger that made the deal possible. The plot, on the surface, is classic late-era South Park. Cartman, of all people, is upset. He is upset because the president has just shut down National Public Radio, which is one of his favorite places to find people he can make fun of. With NPR gone, Cartman feels lost. He starts saying that woke is dead and he does not know what to do with himself anymore. Meanwhile, at South Park Elementary, the principal who used to be called PC Principal, the one who showed up in earlier seasons enforcing political correctness, has changed his name. He is now Power Christian Principal. The school is being forced to put up Christian symbols. Jesus himself, voiced by Matt Stone, has been physically placed in the school as part of a lawsuit settlement. When the parents of South Park object, Jesus pulls them aside and explains, through clenched teeth, that he is here because of a deal Paramount made with the Trump administration. He warns them that if they cause trouble, they will end up like Stephen Colbert. The Stephen Colbert reference was extremely current. Just weeks before the episode aired, Paramount had announced that it was canceling The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Colbert Colbert had been one of the most reliable late-night critics of Donald Trump for years. The cancellation was officially explained as a financial decision, but almost everyone in the entertainment industry believed it was tied to Paramount's recent settlement with Trump. The settlement had been roughly $16 million. It involved a lawsuit Trump had filed against CBS over a 60 Minutes interview. Paramount, which was trying to close a massive merger with another company called Skydance, paid the settlement to make the lawsuit go away. Colbert was canceled shortly after. So when Jesus in the episode looked at the people of South Park and asked if they really wanted to end up like Colbert, this was not a vague joke. This was a direct line connecting the dots that everyone in the industry had already been drawing privately. Jesus, on a children's network, was openly accusing the network's own parent company of caving to a sitting president and of firing one of their own stars in the process. The plot continues. Donald Trump, voiced by Matt Stone, sues the town of South Park for $5 billion. The town's lawyer, who is Kyle's father Gerald, settles the lawsuit. The terms of the settlement are humiliating. The town has to pay Trump $3.5 million. The town also has to produce a series of public service announcements praising the president. The first of those announcements is what made the episode actually historic. It is a fully animated, deepfake assisted advertisement showing Donald Trump wandering through a vast desert. He is completely naked. The technology used to create the scene was provided by an artificial intelligence company that Parker and Stone happened to own, called Deep Voodoo. The scene is rendered with disturbing realism, and in the center of the frame, prominently visible, is a small cartoon penis. The penis has eyes on it. The eyes were not random. The eyes were the result of a 4-day argument between Parker and the network. According to Trey Parker, who told the story publicly at San Diego Comic-Con the day after the episode aired, the executives at Paramount told him that they were going to blur the cartoon penis. Parker refused. He said in his own words that they were not going to blur it. He pushed back hard. The argument went on for 4 days. Eventually, a compromise was reached. The penis would not be blurred on one condition. Parker had to add eyes to it, which would technically make it a character in its own right. Characters by network rules do not need to be blurred. So Parker added eyes. The penis became a character. And the network, which had spent 4 days fighting over this exact detail, finally cleared the episode for air. The result was that the season 27 premiere of South Park ended with a fully realistic, deepfake-aided animation of the President of the United States walking nude through a desert, with a small cartoon penis with eyes on his body, while a voiceover delivered a fake public service announcement praising him. The reaction was swift. Within hours, the episode was the #1 most-watched program on Paramount+. It crashed servers. It generated more press coverage than any South Park episode in years. The viewership numbers, when totaled across cable and streaming, came in at between 5.9 million and 6 million people in the first 3 days. That made it the biggest season opener for South Park in decades, going back as far as 1999. The day after the episode aired, Trey Parker appeared on a panel at San Diego Comic-Con. He was asked about the Trump material. He delivered a single line with a totally straight face. He said that he and Matt were terribly sorry. The audience laughed. It was the same kind of fake apology Parker and Stone had used after the China episode 6 years earlier. It was a piece of theater. The White House did not laugh. The Trump administration issued an official statement on July 24th, 2025, the day after the episode aired. The statement came from a White House assistant press secretary named Taylor Rogers. The statement was unusually long for what was technically a comment about a cartoon. It accused the political left of hypocrisy. It said that for years the left had attacked South Park, and now suddenly the left was praising it. It claimed that, just like the show's creators, the left had no original content. It said the show had not been relevant for over 20 years and was hanging on by a thread. It accused the show of making a desperate attempt for attention. It ended by listing achievements of the Trump administration in its first 6 months. The statement was, by any measure, an extraordinary response. The official press apparatus of the President of the United States had taken time, on a working day, to write and release a public statement attacking a single episode of an adult cartoon. No previous White House had done this in quite the same way. Even when South Park had mocked previous presidents, including Trump himself in earlier seasons, the response had usually come from the president's social media account, or from press secretaries answering questions from reporters. This was different. This was a prepared, official, written statement released by the West Wing about an animated naked man with eyes on his penis. That fact alone tells you how seriously the administration took the episode. Behind the scenes, the story of how the episode got approved is its own piece of the controversy. Paramount at the time was being run by 2 co-CEOs, who had to approve the episode before it aired. The 2 co-CEOs watched it, agreed it was acceptable, but then asked Parker and Stone to describe the contents to Sherry Redstone, who was the chair of Paramount Global. Redstone, who had not actually watched the episode herself, gave her trust to the co-CEOs and let it move forward. David Ellison, the man who would soon become the new CEO of Paramount after the merger with Skydance closed, was warned ahead of time that the episode would be, in his executive's words, disparaging toward Donald Trump. He let it air anyway. The reason all of this matters is timing. The Skydance merger was still in its final stages. The federal government had to approve the deal. The approval required cooperation from regulators who answered ultimately to the Trump administration. By airing an episode that publicly mocked Trump, the company was potentially putting its own merger at risk. By approving the episode anyway, the executives at Paramount were making a choice. Either they trusted that the deal was already too far along to be derailed, or they did not actually have enough control over Parker and Stone to stop them. The most likely answer is the second one. Parker and Stone had just signed a $1.5 billion contract. The terms of that contract were public. They were getting paid an enormous amount of money to make 50 new episodes. The leverage they had over the network in that exact moment was as strong as it had ever been. They knew it, the network knew it, and the episode was the proof. Parker and Stone themselves had been worried before it aired. Parker said publicly at the Comic-Con panel that he had been nervous people would not like the episode. He said that he kept thinking the public service announcement at the end would either be a huge hit or a complete disaster. He admitted that he was prepared for it to fail. It did not fail. It became one of the most talked about pieces of television of the summer. The Stewart Heritage piece in The Guardian called the episode a grand dare. He pointed out that the show had always been known for its quick production cycle, where episodes could comment on events almost up to the moment of broadcast. He said the first episode of season 27 had the potential to sting, and it did. He framed the whole thing as Parker and Stone basically inviting Trump to sue them, daring him to try. Trump did not sue. The administration's official statement was the last word from the White House on the matter. There was no lawsuit, there was no further pressure on the network. There was no attempt to get the episode pulled. The deal between Paramount and Park County remained in place. The 50 new episodes are still being made. What this controversy revealed, more than anything, is the shape of the show in 2025. Parker and Stone are no longer scrappy young creators trying to push boundaries on a basic cable network. They are veteran television producers with one of the largest contracts in the medium. They have their own artificial intelligence company. They have leverage that the people running their network do not have. And they are still, after almost 30 years, willing to point that leverage directly at the most powerful man in the country. It is also worth noting what the episode did not do. It did not pull any punches. It did not soften the satire because of the deal. It did not make the criticism vague. The episode named Stephen Colbert by name. It named Paramount by name. It named the Trump lawsuit, the cancellation, and the merger directly. It used the actual technology of the moment, deep fake animation, against the president of the moment. And it ended on an image so specific, the cartoon penis with eyes, that it became a meme within hours. In the long history of South Park controversies, Sermon on the Mount stands out for one specific reason. It is the only one where the show, the network, the parent company, and the federal government all collided in a single 24-hour period. Most controversies in the show's history play out over weeks or months. This one played out in a single day. The deal was signed, the episode aired, the White House responded, the merger continued, the president did not sue, everyone went on with their lives. And the show kept making more. That speed, that compression of so much chaos into such a short window is what makes the episode different. There was no time to plan. There was no time to soften. There was no time to negotiate. The episode was already finished when the deal was signed, and the deal was already signed when the episode aired. Everyone involved was committing to whatever happened next, and what happened next was the loudest single day of press coverage the show had received in years. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one more controversy from the show's history that is worth remembering before this list moves on. It is older, it is smaller in scale. It involves a religious group, a sacred figure, and a Viacom board member, and it is the only time in the show's history when a single episode managed to be banned in 3 separate countries on 3 separate continents in the same year. It was also, according to Trey Parker himself, the one episode he regrets making more than any other. Section 5, Bloody Mary, the Catholic League's most successful South Park pressure campaign, December 7th, 2005. South Park has just wrapped up its 9th season. The show is at the absolute absolute height of its cultural power. Trapped in the Closet, the Scientology episode, has aired 3 weeks earlier. Isaac Hayes is still on the show, although he will not be for much longer. Parker and Stone are riding the kind of wave that very few television creators ever experience. Everything they make becomes news. The season finale that night is called Bloody Mary. The title sounds like it might be about the cocktail, or about the playground urban legend where children stand in front of a bathroom mirror and chant a name 3 times. The episode is, in a way, about both of those things, but it is really about something else. It is about a statue of the Virgin Mary, and what comes out of that statue is going to make Parker and Stone enemies they have never had before. The plot follows Stan's father, Randy Marsh. Randy gets pulled over for drunk driving with the boys in the car. He loses his license. He is ordered to attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. At those meetings, Randy is told something that does not sit right with him. He is told that alcoholism is a disease. He is told that he is powerless to stop drinking on his own. He is told that he needs a higher power to save him. Randy, being Randy, takes this information in completely the wrong direction. If he is sick, then he needs a cure. He starts looking for miracles, and he finds one just outside of town, a statue of the Virgin Mary. A religious icon found in Catholic churches all over the world has begun to bleed. The statue is in a small chapel in Colorado. Word spreads quickly. Pilgrims arrive by the busload. People in wheelchairs come hoping to be healed. Sick people come hoping to be cured. Randy, certain that this is his answer, joins the crowd. He gets in line. He approaches the statue, and as he does, blood sprays out of the statue and hits him in the face. He is cured. At least, he believes he is cured. The Catholic Church, in the world of the show, takes notice. The Vatican sends a cardinal to investigate. The cardinal stands behind the statue, examining it carefully, and is sprayed with blood as well. He declares this to be a real miracle. The news travels. The crowds grow larger. Then, Pope Benedict XVI himself arrives. The actual real-life Pope, who was the Pope at the time, is depicted in the episode as a cartoon character. He goes to the chapel. He examines the statue. He too is sprayed with blood, and then he discovers something that the cardinal missed. The blood is not coming from the statue's hands or feet, where the wounds of Christ would traditionally be shown in Christian art. The blood is not coming from the eyes either, which would suggest the statue was crying tears of blood, another image with religious meaning. The blood is coming from a different part of the statue entirely. The Pope, in the episode, declares that this is no miracle. He explains in plain terms that women bleed from this part of their bodies all the time. It is not divine, it is not supernatural, it is simply biology. Cartman, watching the news report, says the line out loud for the audience. He notes, in his usual way, that women bleed out of their parts every month and there is nothing miraculous about it. The episode ends with Randy realizing that no miracle saved him. If he is going to control his drinking, he has to do it himself. The lesson of the episode, underneath all the shock value, is about personal responsibility, about not waiting for a higher power to do the work that a person has to do on their own. It is, by South Park standards, a fairly traditional message. Randy learns to drink in moderation. The boys, watching all of this, take their own quiet lessons from it. But the lesson did not matter, because nobody on the outside was paying attention to the lesson. They were paying attention to the image. A statue of the Virgin Mary, the most sacred female figure in the entire Catholic religion, depicted on cable television as bleeding from her crotch, while crowds of believers cheered and the Pope arrived to investigate. The timing of the episode made it worse. Parker and Stone had aired Bloody Mary on the eve of the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. The Feast of the Immaculate Conception is one of the most important days on the Catholic calendar. It is the day that celebrates the belief that the Virgin Mary herself was conceived without sin. It is, in many countries, a public holiday. It is celebrated by hundreds of millions of Catholics around the world, and South Park had aired this episode the night before. Many believed the timing was deliberate. Parker and Stone have never officially confirmed that, but the alignment was hard to miss. The reaction came fast. The Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights, led by a man named Bill Donahue, issued a public statement on December 8th, 2005, the morning after the episode aired. Donahue had spent decades running the Catholic League. He was one of the most aggressive religious activists in American media. He was famous for going after movies, television shows, and books that he felt insulted Catholics. And he had a network of supporters who knew how to apply pressure when he asked them to. Donahue did not just complain about the episode. He made specific demands. He demanded that Viacom, which was the parent company of Comedy Central at the time, issue a formal public apology to all Catholics. He demanded that the episode be permanently retired and never aired again. He demanded that the episode be removed from any future DVD releases of season 9. And he demanded that a man named Joseph Califano Jr., who was a member of Viacom's board of directors and a practicing Catholic, personally make a statement condemning the episode. Califano did exactly that. Within days, he released a public statement calling the episode an appalling and disgusting portrayal of the Virgin Mary. He noted, with extra emphasis, that the episode had aired on the eve of the Immaculate Conception. He said that he had personally spoken to Tom Freston, who was the president and chief executive of Viacom, and asked him to review the episode and decide what to do about it. Bishop William Skylestad, who at the time was the president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, sent his own letter to Tom Freston. The letter accused Comedy Central of showing extreme insensitivity. The Conference of Catholic Bishops is the official body that represents the Catholic Church in the United States. To have its president writing letters to a cable network executive was, by any measure, a serious institutional response. The pressure worked, at least partially. When Comedy Central put together a year-end marathon of season 9 episodes, Bloody Mary was quietly left out. The Catholic League declared victory. They put out a press release thanking Comedy Central for making the right decision. Bill Donahue went on television and credited his organization with forcing the network to back down. The network never officially confirmed that the Catholic League pressure was the reason for the omission. They told fans in automated email replies that the episode had simply not been included in a holiday-themed marathon out of respect for the season, and that the episode had not been permanently shelved. Then, on August 2nd, 2006, almost exactly 8 months after the original airing, Comedy Central quietly aired the episode again. There had been no public announcement, there had been no warning. The episode just appeared in the regular rotation, as if nothing had ever happened. The Catholic League was furious. Donahue put out another statement, accusing the network of going back on its word. He pointed out that he had been told personally, in a phone call from a Comedy Central executive, that the episode would not be aired again. The phone call, Donahue claimed, had been a lie. The network pushed back. A spokesperson for Comedy Central explained the position clearly. The network had never permanently retired the episode. Despite what some had claimed, Bloody Mary had not been pulled because of outside pressure, and it would not be excluded from future DVD releases. As satirists, Comedy Central said, they believed it was their First Amendment right to make fun of any people, groups, organizations, and religions, and they would continue to do so. The whole back and forth tells a story. The Catholic League had real power, and they used it. They had managed to get a Viacom board member to publicly condemn one of the network's own shows. They had managed to get a major Catholic bishop to write formal letters. They had managed to convince the network to pull the episode from a marathon, but they could not, in the end, get the episode permanently banned. The episode came back. The DVD release went forward. The fight, in the long run, ended in a kind of draw. The Catholic League could not silence South Park completely. South Park could not avoid taking the hit. The episode caused trouble outside the United States, too. In New Zealand, the episode aired on a music channel called C4 in February of 2006. The country's Catholic leadership, led by the New Zealand Catholic Bishops' Conference, organized a boycott. They told their members to contact the network's advertisers. They told them to stop watching the channel. The protest worked, in a strange way. The episode drew a record audience for the channel. More than 300,000 people tuned in. That was 6 times the usual audience for a South Park episode in New Zealand. The boycott had become free advertising. 35 formal complaints were filed with New Zealand's Broadcasting Standards Authority. The authority reviewed the complaints carefully. In June of 2006, they dismissed all of them. Their reasoning was specific. They acknowledged that the episode showed disrespect to a religious figure, but they pointed out that disrespect alone is not the same as a vicious attack. They noted that the episode was so absurd, so clearly a piece of farcical comedy, that it did not breach New Zealand's standards of good taste and decency. In Australia, things went differently. Archbishop Dennis Hart, who is the Catholic Archbishop of Melbourne, wrote directly to the SBS network and asked them not to air the episode. The network's programming director initially refused his request, defending the right to broadcast it. Then, weeks later, the network changed its mind. The reason given was the Yilins Postin Muhammad cartoons controversy, which was causing global riots at the time. The network decided that, given the climate, it was better to delay the broadcast. SBS finally aired the episode in 2006, but only after pulling it back once. Bloody Mary was one of 3 South Park episodes ever to be banned in Australia. The other 2, much later, would be episodes 200 and 201. That puts Bloody Mary in elite company. Out of more than 300 episodes, only 3 of them have been considered too dangerous for Australian airwaves, and Bloody Mary was the first. Russia banned the episode entirely. It has never aired there. Several Several other countries in Eastern Europe and Latin America also pulled or restricted the episode after their local Catholic communities raised concerns. What makes Bloody Mary stand out even today is the position Trey Parker has taken about it in retrospect. Parker has, on rare occasions, expressed regret about specific episodes of the show. The episodes he regrets are not always the ones that cause the biggest controversies. They are the ones where, in his own private reflection, he felt that the joke did not quite land, or that the criticism was not as sharp as the offense it caused. Bloody Mary is, by Parker's own statements, the episode he regrets the most. More than Trapped in the Closet, more than the Steve Irwin episode, more than any of the episodes that triggered death threats or international incidents. According to Parker, Bloody Mary is the episode he most wishes he could go back and rewrite. The exact reasoning has never been fully explained in public, but the implication is clear. Parker felt that the imagery of the episode crossed a line that he himself, in retrospect, would not have crossed if he had been thinking more carefully. That admission, coming from a man who has built his entire career on never apologizing for his work, is significant. Parker has stood by Trapped in the Closet through 20 years of pressure. He has stood by episodes 200 and 201 through actual death threats. He has stood by Sermon on the Mount through White House attacks. The one episode he has openly distanced himself from is the one where the target was a religious figure who, in the ordinary daily lives of hundreds of millions of Catholic believers, represents motherhood, mercy, and protection. Bloody Mary is, in a way, a kind of dividing line in the history of South Park controversies. After this episode, Parker and Stone became more careful, in subtle ways, about how they handled certain religious imagery. They continued to mock religion. They continued to push limits. But certain specific images, certain specific figures, never came back in quite the same way. The episode itself today is still available on streaming services in most parts of the world. It is part of the official record of Season 9. The Catholic League did not get its complete victory, but they got more than most groups have ever gotten out of a fight with Parker and Stone. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one more controversy from this same era that needs telling. It happened only a few months after Bloody Mary in the spring of 2006. It involved another religion, another sacred figure, and the same network that had just been pressured into temporarily pulling Bloody Mary off the air. Comedy Central had learned from the Catholic League fight that pressure could change their decisions. The next group to apply pressure was much smaller, much less organized, and much more dangerous. And the way the network handled them set the stage for everything that would happen 4 years later. Section 6. Cartoon Wars. The first time Comedy Central censored Muhammad. April of 2006, the Bloody Mary fight is barely 4 months old. The Catholic League victory dance is still fresh in everyone's memory. Parker and Stone, watching all of this play out, are not happy. They have spent years making fun of every religion they can think of, and the network has always backed them up. Then, suddenly the network started flinching. The episodes started getting pulled, the pressure started working, and Parker and Stone decided that the next thing they made would be about exactly that. About the way networks were starting to back down, about the way fear was changing what comedy could and could not do. The result was a 2-part episode called Cartoon Wars. Part 1 aired on April 5th, 2006. Part 2 aired on April 12th, 2006. The 2 episodes together form the most direct attack on network censorship that South Park has ever attempted. They are also, by accident, the dress rehearsal for everything that would explode 4 years later with episodes 200 and 201. The plot starts in a strange place. There is news in the town of South Park that an upcoming episode of the cartoon Family Guy is going to feature the Prophet Muhammad as a character. Just the news, just the announcement, sends the entire town into a panic. Everyone is convinced that violence is about to come to America. People start fleeing into bunkers. Parents bury their children's heads in the sand, literally, as a way of pretending that they have not seen anything. The town turns into a chaos of fear, all because of a cartoon that is not even aired yet. The reason this plot works is that it was based on real events. The previous year, in 2005, a Danish newspaper called Jyllandsposten had published 12 cartoons depicting Muhammad. The cartoons had triggered massive riots across the Muslim world. Embassies in several countries had been attacked. Buildings had been burned. People had died. The Danish cartoonists themselves had been forced into hiding, with some of them needing 24-hour police protection for the rest of their lives. The crisis had reshaped global thinking about what Western media could and could not show. Parker and Stone watched all of this and noticed something specific. Western media companies, including their own, had quietly agreed that Muhammad was off limits. There had been no announcement. There had been no formal policy change. But after the riots, every major American newspaper, magazine, and television network simply stopped showing images of Muhammad. The line had moved. The reason for for the line had nothing to do with respect. The reason was fear. And Parker and Stone, who had been mocking religious figures freely for years, were furious about it. Cartoon Wars Part 1 was their attempt to put that fury on screen. The plot follows Cartman, who travels across the country to try to stop Family Guy from airing the Muhammad episode. Cartman pretends to be doing this out of religious sensitivity. He claims to be defending Muslims. He gives speeches about how the show should not air the offensive material. The audience, of course, knows that Cartman does not care about Muslims at all. Cartman has spent every previous episode making fun of every group he can think of. His real motivation is something else, and Part 1 ends with the truth not yet revealed. Part 2, the following week, fills in the rest. Cartman does not actually want to protect Muslims from offensive content. Cartman just hates Family Guy. He hates the show. He hates the writers. He hates the way the show is made. And he is using the Muhammad controversy as a cover, as a way to get the show pulled because he cannot stand Family Guy and wants it gone. Inside the Family Guy studios, Cartman discovers something extraordinary. Family Guy, in the world of South Park, is not written by humans. The writers are a group of trained sea creatures called manatees. The manatees live in a giant tank. The tank is filled with thousands of small balls. Each ball has a single random word printed on it. A word like share, or laundry, or Mexico, or kittens. The manatees pull balls out of the tank in random combinations. The combinations get fed into a machine. The machine generates the cutaway gags that Family Guy is famous for. The joke was specific and brutal. Parker and Stone were saying on national television that Family Guy's writing process was random, that the show's jokes had nothing to do with the plots of its episodes, that it was just a series of unrelated pop culture references generated by chance with no actual storytelling craft underneath any of it. Cartman, the character, then tries to sabotage Family Guy by removing one of the balls from the tank. The manatees stop working, the episode never gets made, and Cartman wins. That was the surface of Cartoon Wars Part 2, a long sustained insult aimed at another animated show. But underneath that insult was the real point of the episode, the point about Muhammad. In the world of the show, Family Guy decides to air the Muhammad episode anyway, against Cartman's wishes. The South Park audience watches as the moment approaches. The network executive at Fox, the company that airs Family Guy, has to make a choice. Will the episode air uncensored, or will Muhammad be replaced with a black title card? Then comes the moment. The Family Guy episode plays. Muhammad is supposed to appear on screen, and in his place, the audience sees a black title card. The title card explains that Comedy Central has refused to allow the depiction. The on-screen text is the network apologizing for its own censorship. This is where the real-life controversy started, because the title card was not a joke. It was real. Comedy Central had, in fact, refused to allow Parker and Stone to show Muhammad in the episode. The network had insisted on the black box. Parker and Stone, in turn, had decided to make the network's own censorship part of the episode itself. They would air the episode, but they would also make sure the audience knew exactly what had happened. The black box was both a piece of network policy and a piece of South Park satire. The same image was doing both jobs at the same time. Comedy Central, the day after the episode aired, released its own statement. The statement was short. It said that, in light of recent world events, the network felt it had made the right decision. That was it. The network was openly admitting that it had censored its own show, and it was admitting that the reason was fear. Parker and Stone were furious. Not at the title card, which they had cleverly turned to their advantage. They were furious at the principle of what had happened. They had wanted to show Muhammad. The network had refused, and the only reason for the refusal was that other people in other parts of the world might react with violence. The network had let the threat of violence change what could and could not appear on American television. To Parker and Stone, this was the exact thing that the entire two-part episode had been arguing against. Both Cartoon Wars Part 1 and Cartoon Wars Part 2 were eventually pulled from regular airings and from streaming services. To this day, neither episode is available on any major streaming platform in the United States. They are not on Paramount Plus, they were never on HBO Max, they are not on the South Park Studios website. The DVDs of Season 10 still include them, but for almost everyone watching the show today, those two episodes simply do not exist. The most surprising part of the whole controversy in retrospect is how Family Guy responded. Seth MacFarlane, the creator of Family Guy, did not react with anger. He reacted with humor. In June of 2006, just 2 months after Cartoon Wars aired, MacFarlane gave a speech at Harvard University. He gave the speech in character, as the baby Stewie from his own show. In the speech, he made fun of his own show's writing style. He said that the cutaways and flashbacks really did have nothing to do with the story. He said they really were just there to be funny. He said that this was a shallow form of comedy, and he saluted South Park for being above it. Years later, in a 2012 interview with Rolling Stone magazine, McFarlane went further. He called the Cartoon Wars episodes funny and accurate. He admitted that he was actually a fan of what Parker and Stone had done. The only thing he objected to was what came after the episodes. In interviews and other public appearances, Parker and Stone had continued to attack him personally, in ways that felt less like satire and more like a real grudge. McFarlane found this strange. He pointed out correctly that he did not even know Parker and Stone in real life. He said he could not understand why the venom kept coming. On the Howard Stern show, McFarlane joked about the rivalry. He said that meetings with Parker and Stone were as friendly as meetings between Winston Churchill and Adolf Hitler during World War II. The line was a joke, but underneath the joke there was a real frustration. McFarlane felt that he had taken the satire well, that he had even publicly praised it, and that Parker and Stone were continuing to attack him for reasons he did not understand. The feud has cooled with time. In 2025, McFarlane gave an interview where he praised South Park's longevity. He said that any show lasting that long was incredible. He noted that Family Guy episodes take 10 to 12 months to produce, while South Park episodes can be made in a single week. He sounded, finally, like someone who had moved on from the fight. But the deeper consequences of Cartoon Wars went far beyond the Family Guy feud. The black box on the screen, the censored Muhammad, the network's public statement about world events, all of it set up the next round. Parker and Stone had been told by their own network that there were now subjects they could not touch. They had spent 2 episodes making fun of that exact rule, and they had lost. The black box had appeared anyway. The network had apologized for its own product. The censorship had won. That defeat, that quiet humiliation, sat with Parker and Stone for the next 4 years. They knew the rule had changed. They knew that something had broken about the way their show was allowed to operate, and they were waiting for the right moment to test the rule again, to push back against it, to see if, 4 years later, things had improved or gotten worse. The answer, when they finally got to ask the question, was that things had gotten worse. The Cartoon Wars episodes had been censored, but at least they had been censored in advance, while everything was still being made. By the time episodes 200 and 201 came around in 2010, the network would not even let Parker and Stone see what was being changed. The censorship would happen behind their backs, after the episodes were already finished, with the audio bleeped and the speeches cut without any of the warnings or negotiations that had at least been part of the Cartoon Wars process. That is part of why Cartoon Wars deserves its own place on this list, separate from 200 and 201. The two events are connected. The later, bigger crisis is impossible to understand without the smaller, earlier one. But Cartoon Wars is also its own story. It is the moment when Parker and Stone first realized that the rules of their show had changed. It is the moment when they first lost a fight with their own network. And it is the moment when, somewhere in the back of their minds, they started planning the response that would, 4 years later, make episodes 200 and 201 the most controversial pieces of television they had ever made. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one more controversy from this same year that has to be told. It happened only 6 months after Cartoon Wars Part 2 aired. It did not involve Muhammad. It did not involve the network's censorship policies. It did not involve any other television show. It involved a beloved Australian wildlife expert who had died only weeks earlier in a freak accident, and a Halloween party in hell that, even by South Park standards, went too far, too soon. Section 7, Hell on Earth 2006, the Steve Irwin joke. The show's own devil called Tasteless. September 4th, 2006. The world wakes up to news that almost nobody could have predicted. Steve Irwin, the Australian wildlife expert known to billions as the crocodile hunter, has been killed. He was filming an underwater documentary off the coast of northern Australia. He was swimming above a stingray, a kind of flat fish with a long whip-like tail. The stingray, panicked, struck upward. The barb at the end of its tail pierced Steve Irwin's chest. He died within minutes. The news landed with shocking weight. Irwin had been one of the most beloved figures on television. He had spent his life teaching children about animals. He had built a wildlife park in Australia that millions had visited. He had a wife, Terry, and 2 young children, Bindi and Robert. He was 44 years old. The world mourned together. Late-night hosts paused their shows to pay tribute. Animal Planet, the network where his show had aired for years, ran tribute marathons. Children who had grown up watching him cried. Adults who had laughed at his over-the-top energy realized suddenly that he had been special. 7 weeks later, on October 25th, 2006, South Park aired its annual Halloween episode. The episode was called Hell on Earth 4th, 2006. And inside that episode, Parker and Stone made a joke about Steve Irwin's death that would generate one of the strongest negative reactions of the show's entire run. The plot of the episode is one of the funniest the show ever did, ignoring the controversial moment for a second. Satan, the devil himself, is throwing a massive birthday party on Earth. The party is taking place at a hotel in Los Angeles. Satan is a recurring character on South Park, going back to the show's earliest seasons, and he is depicted in this episode as a spoiled and obsessive party host. He has watched the MTV reality show My Super Sweet 16, where rich teenage girls throw enormous birthday parties for themselves and behave like monsters in the process. And Satan has decided that he wants a party just like that. The episode is, in many ways, a parody of My Super Sweet 16. Satan throws tantrums when small details go wrong. He demands a cake the size and shape of a Ferrari Enzo, which is a real, very expensive sports car. He yells at his minions. He cries about minor problems. He treats the entire afterlife as a tool for his personal celebration. 3 notorious real-life serial killers, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and John Wayne Gacy, are sent to retrieve the Ferrari cake from a bakery. They cause a series of disasters trying to do this, in a sequence that plays out as a parody of the comedy team The Three Stooges. A separate plot follows Butters, who learns about a Halloween urban legend. The legend says that if you stand in a bathroom with the lights off and say the name Biggie Smalls 3 times, the ghost of the famous rapper will appear. Butters and his friends try it. It works. Biggie Smalls, the legendary rapper who was murdered in 1997, appears in the bathroom, very annoyed at having been pulled out of hell on a school night. These plots on their own are vintage South Park. Dark, absurd, surreal, full of running jokes and cultural references. The episode is widely considered one of the best Halloween specials the show ever made. It has been praised by critics, ranked highly by fans, and held up as an example of late-era South Park doing what it does best. But there is one scene, lasting only about a minute of total screen time, that overwhelmed everything else about the episode in the public reaction. In the middle of Satan's party, one of his minions reports a problem. A guest has shown up wearing a costume that other guests are finding offensive. Satan, frustrated, marches over to confront the guest. The guest is dressed as Steve Irwin. He is wearing the famous khaki uniform Irwin always wore on his show. He is holding the same kind of equipment Irwin used in his television work, and there is a stingray animated as a small gray shape sticking out of his chest. Satan, before he realizes who it actually is, scolds the guest. He says that this is in extremely bad taste. He says that Irwin only died 7 weeks ago. He says that nobody should be wearing a costume like that so soon after a real person's death. Satan, the literal devil, the ruler of hell, is the character in the scene who declares that the joke has gone too far. Then the punchline lands. The guest is not someone in a costume. The guest is actually Steve Irwin himself, who has died and arrived in hell. He is just walking around as he was when he died, which happens to include the stingray that killed him. Satan, realizing this, kicks Irwin out of the party. He kicks him out hilariously not because the appearance is offensive, but because Irwin is not technically wearing a costume. Halloween party rules require a costume. Steve Irwin does not have one, so he has to leave. The joke is constructed with what some would call clever layering. The episode itself is making fun of the idea that the joke is in poor taste. Satan, the worst person in the universe, is the one drawing the line. The audience is meant to recognize the layered self-awareness of it. The episode is acknowledging, through its own characters, that this is a tasteless thing to do while also doing it. That cleverness did not save it. Within days of the episode airing, the response from Steve Irwin's family began to land in public. Terry Irwin, his widow, was reported to be devastated. A close friend of the family released a statement on her behalf. The statement said that Terry was crushed to see Steve being mocked in such a cruel way. Her biggest fear, the statement said, was that Bindi and Robert, the 2 young children, would somehow see the episode and break down. Steve, the statement noted, had a sense of humor as big as anyone's, but this had gone too far and far too soon. Mark Amy, a fellow naturalist who had worked alongside Irwin and known him for years, spoke to the press as well. His response was less polite. He called the episode distasteful. He used a much rougher word along with it. He called the show out for going after a man whose body, in some sense, was not even cold yet. John Bayer, the director of a British media watchdog group called MediaWatch-UK, joined the criticism publicly. He said that the scene was in bad taste and that Parker and Stone should review their decision to broadcast it. Comedy Central defended the episode. A spokesperson named Tony Fox pointed out, correctly, that South Park did inappropriate things all the time. Their goal, he said, was to make people laugh, not to offend people. Another network spokesperson noted that South Park had offended people in the past and would offend people again. Regular viewers viewers, the spokesperson said, would not be shocked. The defense did little to calm the situation. The Australian Communications and Media Authority got involved. They reviewed the episode. They ultimately allowed it to be broadcast on the Australian SBS network, but they delayed the broadcast by 12 full months. The network had to wait an entire year before showing the episode in Australia. By then, the immediate sting of Irwin's death had faded somewhat, and the episode could air without the same level of pain. What makes Hell on Earth 2006 stand out in the long history of South Park controversies is something specific. South Park had made fun of Steve Irwin before. There was an earlier episode, all the way back in 1999, called Prehistoric Iceman. That episode featured a clear parody of Irwin, with a man dressed in his style of clothes, speaking in his style of voice, doing exaggerated wildlife stunts. The 1999 parody had generated zero controversy. People had laughed. Irwin himself had reportedly been amused by it. The exact same kind of parody, in 2006, generated a massive backlash. The difference was timing. Irwin had been alive in 1999. He was dead in 2006. The joke that worked the first time did not work the second time. And the reason had nothing to do with the structure of the joke. The reason was that the world had changed in the most tragic possible way for one specific family. Parker and Stone, in the years that followed, said publicly that they had been surprised by the level of backlash. They felt, in their words, that they had made far more offensive content in other episodes. They pointed out, accurately, that the same episode featured Hitler at the party, dressed in a costume of the Verizon cell phone test guy, complete with the catchphrase, "Can you hear me now?" They pointed out that 3 serial killers were running around as comedy characters. They pointed out that the episode treated mass murder as a backdrop for a Sweet 16 party. They had thought, going in, that the Steve Irwin moment would be a small piece of a much larger and darker tapestry. The audience and the press and the family did not see it that way. The Hitler costume gag did not generate news coverage. The serial killers did not generate complaints from anyone's family. The Steve Irwin gag was the one that got pulled out and held up for criticism. The reason, again, was timing. The Holocaust ended decades earlier. The serial killers had committed their crimes in the 1970s and 1980s, with their victims long since mourned. Steve Irwin had been alive less than 2 months before the episode aired. He had a wife and children who were still in the rawest stages of grief. The audience, even an audience used to South Park's cruelty, could not laugh at that. This pattern, where timing changes whether a joke works, has shown up many times in the history of comedy. There is no rule that says a joke about a specific tragedy will never be funny. There is, instead, a kind of unwritten understanding that the further away from a tragedy a joke comes, the easier it is to laugh at. Hell on Earth 2006 broke that unwritten rule. 7 weeks was simply not enough time. Even the show's own writers, looking back, seem to acknowledge this in subtle ways. Steve Irwin appeared again in later episodes, in callback gags and cameos. The character's appearances in those later episodes are notably more respectful. The Stingray jokes do not quite stop, but they soften. What the episode did achieve, accidentally, was a kind of test of South Park's defenders. The show has always had a large group of fans who will defend any episode, no matter how offensive, on the grounds that South Park is supposed to be offensive. Those fans defended this episode too. They argued that the joke was layered, that Satan was the one calling out the bad taste, that the audience was meant to be in on the meta commentary. They argued that comedy is supposed to push limits, and that limits include time as well as content. Other fans, even fans who had defended the show through far worse, broke ranks on this one. Terry Irwin's pain was too obvious. The children's grief was too real. The kindness of the man being mocked was too well established in public memory. There was no political agenda to defend. There was no religious institution to push back against. There was just a widow, 2 young children, and a joke that had landed at exactly the wrong time. The episode remains in the South Park library today. It is available on Paramount Plus. It airs in syndication. It is included in DVD releases of season 10. The Steve Irwin scene has not been edited out. The show, true to its principles, has not pretended the joke never happened. Parker and Stone have not apologized for it in any formal way, although their later, gentler depictions of the Irwin character suggest some quiet adjustment in how they think about the moment. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one more episode from this same long stretch of South Park history that needs telling. It happened in 2005, 8 months before Bloody Mary, and it caused a different kind of fight. This one was inside the show itself. It was a fight Parker and Stone had with their own network, with their own writing process, and even with themselves. The episode that came out of it is one of only a small number that the creators have publicly admitted they regret, and the controversy at the heart of it would shape how the show approached one specific topic for the next 20 years. Section 8. Mr. Garrison's Fancy New Vagina, the episode. The creators themselves walked back. March of 2005. South Park is starting its 9th season. The show has been on the air for 8 years at this point. The writer's room has a routine. The episodes, famously, are made in about a week each. An idea hits the table on a Thursday. By the next Wednesday, it is on cable television. The speed is part of the show's identity. It is also, sometimes, the source of its biggest mistakes. Trey Parker has talked openly about the way the room worked back then. The team would come into a new season with very few ideas locked in. They would brainstorm, write, animate, and air, all in a constantly running cycle. For season 9, by Parker's own later admission, they came in with almost nothing. They had a rough idea for an episode about hippies, and they had a rough idea for an episode where the school's 4th grade teacher, Mr. Garrison, would get a sex change. The idea for the Garrison episode came partly from a real place in the world. There was a small town in Colorado called Trinidad. For decades, Trinidad had been known, quietly and informally, as a center for sex reassignment surgery in the United States. A doctor named Stanley Bieber had performed thousands of these operations there over many years. He was respected in the medical community for his work. The town had, by accident, become known across the country among people seeking that kind of surgery. Parker and Stone, both Colorado natives, had grown up hearing about Trinidad. The setting was already in their heads. The character of Mr. Garrison, who had spent the entire series struggling with confusion about his own gender and sexuality, fit the idea easily, so they put it on the schedule. The episode was called Mr. Garrison's Fancy New Vagina. It aired on March 9th, 2005 as the season premiere. It is the episode Parker has said more than once was the closest he ever came to walking away from the show entirely. The plot, on the surface, is simple. Mr. Garrison decides, after years of personal confusion, that he is a woman trapped in a man's body. He travels to Trinidad. He meets a doctor named Dr. Bieber, named after the real-life surgeon, although the cartoon character is presented as cartoonishly out of his depth. Garrison goes through the surgery. He returns to South Park as a woman, now calling herself Mrs. Garrison. That is the first plot. The second plot, running alongside it, is what made the episode go from edgy to flat-out chaotic. Kyle, the rabbi's son, has been told by his basketball coach that he will never be a great player. The coach has used a cruel reason for this. He has told Kyle that Kyle is too short to play, and that the reason he is too short is that he is Jewish. Kyle, hearing about Mr. Garrison's surgery, has an idea. If a man can become a woman through surgery, why can a Jewish boy not become a black boy through surgery? Why can he not be made tall the way black basketball players in the cartoon's exaggerated logic are tall? Kyle's mother, in trying to be supportive of Mr. Garrison's choice, has accidentally given Kyle the impression that any kind of body change is okay if it lines up with how a person feels inside. Kyle goes to Dr. Bieber. He asks for what the doctor calls a negroplasty. The episode treats this as another absurd procedure like Garrison's surgery. Kyle's father, Gerald, tries to stop the operation, but Dr. Bieber notices that Gerald is wearing a shirt with a dolphin on it. The doctor convinces Gerald that he too is a creature trapped in the wrong body. Gerald, Dr. Bieber says, is actually a dolphin trapped in a human body. Gerald, in a moment of confusion, agrees to a dolphinoplasty. He has surgery to transform parts of his body to look more like a dolphin. So now there are 3 characters in the same episode who have all been told by the same doctor that they are someone or something other than what their bodies say they are. A teacher who feels he is a woman, a boy who feels he is a tall black athlete, a father who feels he is a dolphin. The episode is putting these 3 things side by side on purpose to make a single argument. The argument, depending on how generous a viewer wants to be, is either a hard-hitting piece of social commentary or a deeply mean-spirited dismissal of people who feel uncomfortable in their own bodies. The reaction to the episode at the time was mixed. Some critics praised the episode's willingness to take on a topic that very few television shows would touch. Others, including some who had defended South Park through years of much rougher material, found it cruel. The medical content of the episode is what generated the most internal trouble at the network. When Parker first turned in the episode, the surgery scene at the center of it contained more than 5 minutes of real, live-action footage of an actual sex reassignment surgery. The footage was graphic. The footage had been added in part because the writing room had run short of comedy material. Parker has admitted in the years since that the long surgery sequence was filler. The team did not have enough jokes to fill 22 minutes of episode. They padded the runtime with the surgery footage. They knew it was uncomfortable. They thought the discomfort was the joke. Comedy Central, in a rare and unusual move, refused to allow it. The network executives, who had let Parker and Stone do almost anything they wanted, wanted for nearly a decade, drew a hard line. The 5 minutes of real footage had to go. Parker pushed back. The network held firm. Eventually, a compromise was reached. The surgery footage would still be in the episode, but only in 3 brief flashes, each lasting about a second. The rest of the runtime had to be filled with other material. Parker added more of the dolphin and basketball plots to make up for the lost time. That is how the second and third plots ended up so big in the final cut. Parker has spoken several times about how stressful that production week was. He has said in interviews that he came closer to giving up on South Park during the making of this episode than at any other point in the show's history. He has used the phrase pulling a Dave Chappelle, referring to the way Dave Chappelle famously walked away from his own television show in 2005. Parker said he almost did the same thing. He almost packed up and quit. The fight with the network, the lack of jokes, the discomfort with what the episode was actually saying, all of it pushed him to a place he had never been before. The episode aired anyway. The reaction from fans was divided. The transgender community, which was just beginning to gain real visibility in American media at the time, was understandably upset. The episode treated gender identity, racial identity, and species identity as the same kind of joke, a series of equally absurd things that confused people might want for themselves. To some viewers, that was the whole point of the satire. To others, it flattened a real and serious experience into a punchline. In the years that followed, Parker and Stone themselves changed how they talked about the episode. Both of them have said publicly that they were unhappy with how the episode came across. Both have admitted that the comparison between gender identity and species identity in particular did not land the way they had hoped. They have not pulled the episode, they have not edited it, but they have, in their own quiet way, signaled that this was one of the times they got it wrong. 3 seasons later, in 2008, the show effectively walked back the entire plot. In an episode called Eek, a Penis, Mr. Garrison decides to detransition. The character undergoes a second surgery, this time to reverse the changes from the first. He returns to being Mr. Garrison, the same male teacher he had been before season 9. The show treats the reversal as quietly as possible. There is no big speech, there is no apology episode. The character simply returns to who he was, and the show moves on. From that point forward, the events of Mr. Garrison's fancy new vagina were almost never referenced again. That choice, to roll back a major character change without ever explicitly admitting it had been a mistake, tells its own story. South Park has built an entire run on never apologizing. Parker and Stone, by their public statements, do not believe in apologizing for jokes, and yet here, on this one specific topic, the show essentially erased its own work. The character returned to his original form. The wider transgender storyline that the original episode might have generated was simply abandoned. The show, in its quiet way, was admitting that it had not handled the topic well, even if its creators would never use the word sorry. The story of Mr. Garrison did not end there, however. The character continued to evolve in unexpected directions. In season 20, in 2016, the show needed a parody of Donald Trump for the upcoming election. Rather than depicting Trump directly, Parker and Stone turned Mr. Garrison into him. Garrison began running for president, then won the presidency, and served as the show's stand-in for the Trump administration through season 24. The character had become a vehicle for political commentary in a way that almost completely buried the gender storyline that had once defined him. Then, in 2025, the show changed course again. For the second Trump term, Parker and Stone abandoned the Garrison as Trump conceit. They depicted Donald Trump directly, voiced by Matt Stone, modeled visually on the show's earlier depiction of Saddam Hussein. Mr. Garrison was quietly returned to being a regular school teacher. The political content moved off of him. By 2025, the events of Mr. Garrison's fancy new vagina were so far in the show's past that most newer viewers had no idea they had ever happened. There was one strange afterlife to the episode that almost nobody could have predicted. In 2023, almost 20 years after the episode aired, clips from it began going viral on social media. The clips circulated in conservative media spaces, where commentators framed them as proof that South Park had foreseen current debates about gender identity. The clips were shared widely. Articles were written about the show's supposed prophecy. Parker and Stone never weighed in on this revival. The framing was not theirs. The episode they had once nearly walked away from had become, against their wishes, a piece of evidence in a political fight they had never asked to join. The whole arc of Mr. Garrison's fancy new vagina is, in some ways, the most quietly revealing controversy in the show's history. There were no death threats, no country banned it, no church organized against it. Comedy Central did not apologize for it. And yet, behind closed doors, this is the episode that nearly broke Trey Parker. This is the episode that the creators have publicly distanced themselves from, in ways they have refused to do for any of their bigger, louder Parker controversies. This is the episode where the show's own internal regret is on the clearest display. What makes the moment important looking back is not the episode itself. It is what the episode reveals about how Parker and Stone work. They will fight networks. They will fight foreign governments. They will fight the Catholic Church and the White House and the Church of Scientology. They will fight celebrities and politicians and the entire concept of polite comedy. The one thing they will sometimes do, very quietly, almost in private, is admit that they got something wrong. They will not say it in a press release. They will not film an apology episode. They will simply, in the work, walk it back. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That brings the story to one of the strangest patterns in South Park's whole history. There is a category of fights the show has gotten into that does not involve religious leaders, foreign governments, or even network executives. The other side of these fights is always the same kind of person, just a different name each time. They are wealthy. They are famous. They are used to being taken seriously. And, with very few exceptions, they have all reacted to South Park in the same predictable way. The next stretch of controversies is the long, strange story of what happens when a celebrity, of any size or shape, gets the South Park treatment. Section 9. The celebrity feuds that defined an era. Streisand, Cruz, Kanye, and beyond. There is a pattern that runs through almost the entire history of South Park, and it has nothing to do with religion or politics or international incidents. It has to do with famous people. Specifically, with what happens when a famous person finds out that the show has made an episode about them. The pattern is almost always the same. The show airs the episode. The celebrity hears about it. Sometimes they watch it themselves. Sometimes they find out about it through their team. The reaction follows one of two paths. The celebrity either laughs along, makes a self-aware comment, and gets to enjoy a small bump of free publicity, or the celebrity gets visibly angry, complains in public, and ends up looking exactly like the version of themselves the show was making fun of in the first place. There is almost no middle ground. The show has been running this same test on famous people for nearly 30 years, and the results have been remarkably consistent. The first major celebrity to take the test was Barbra Streisand. The episode was called Mecha Streisand. It aired on February 18th, 1998 in the show's first season. The episode is exactly what the title sounds like. Streisand, in the world of South Park, finds a mystical artifact. The artifact transforms her into a giant robotic monster, the kind of creature that would appear in a Japanese Godzilla movie. She begins destroying the town of South Park. The boys try to stop her. They are saved by a strange team of celebrity allies, including Sidney Poitier, the film critic Leonard Maltin, and Robert Smith, the lead singer of the band The Cure, who himself transforms into a giant moth-like creature to fight her. The reasons Parker and Stone chose Streisand were specific. She had publicly stated that she would never return to Colorado, where Parker and Stone were raised. She had been outspoken about her dislike of certain aspects of American culture in ways that the two creators found both pretentious and annoying. They turned that into a giant cyborg dinosaur and put it on basic cable. Streisand's response, given to Mirabella magazine in 1997, was the kind of measured, slightly hurt complaint that the show would learn to expect from celebrities for years to come. She said she had not even known the show existed until she had read about her own appearance in Time magazine. She said that she enjoyed satire and parody, citing the film In and Out as an example of a parody she had liked. But she said that she wondered if shows like South Park and the older animated show Beavis and Butthead were adding to cynicism and negativity in American culture. She was particularly worried about the impact on children. The line about children was, in retrospect, the giveaway. South Park had targeted Streisand once. Her complaint, especially the framing of it as a worry about children, gave the writers everything they needed to come back at her again. In season 2, the show released an episode called Spooky Fish. In Spooky Fish, every single shot of the episode was framed by photographs of Barbra Streisand around the edges, like a haunted picture frame. The text on screen called this Spooky Vision. The joke was that Streisand herself was the scariest thing the show could think of. The framing continued for the entire episode. It was an act of pure spite, and it was extremely funny. Years later, Streisand did finally come around. She attended a Broadway performance of The Book of Mormon, the musical Parker and Stone wrote together. She spoke kindly about it. She forgave them in her own quiet way. But the original Mecha Streisand episode set the template. Get angry at South Park, and South Park will come back harder. Laugh along, and South Park will probably leave you alone. Leonard Maltin, who had been included in the same Mecha Streisand episode as a hero, learned a different lesson. Maltin's portrayal in the episode was friendly. He was depicted as a smart and capable ally to the boys. His own children, when they saw the episode, were thrilled. thrilled. Maltin himself thought the whole thing was a small honor. Years later, on a podcast, Maltin was asked whether he had given the show permission to feature him. His answer became a small piece of comedy history. He said he had given the same permission Barbra Streisand gave. The point was that South Park does not ask. The show puts famous people on screen whether they like it or not. Maltin's approach, which was to enjoy the appearance and not take it too seriously, has been the smarter response by almost every measure. The most famous celebrity feud, however, came years later in season 13. The episode was called Fish Sticks. It aired on April 8th, 2009. The plot is one of the simplest the show ever did. Cartman and Jimmy, the comedian character, come up with a new joke. The joke is about fish sticks. The setup is that someone asks if you like fish sticks. The punchline involves a play on words that, in the world of the show, becomes the funniest joke anyone has ever heard. The whole world starts repeating it. The joke spreads from coast to coast. People are laughing about fish sticks everywhere. There is one person on Earth in the world of the show who does not understand the joke. That person is the rapper Kanye West. Every time someone tells him the joke, he gets confused. He cannot work out what the wordplay means. He becomes more and more frustrated. He becomes convinced that the entire world is in on a joke he is not smart enough to get. By the end of the episode, in a sequence set to a deliberately auto-tuned song, Kanye accepts that he must in fact be a different kind of fish entirely. The episode landed in the real world like a small earthquake. Kanye West responded publicly within days. He posted a long entry on his blog. The post was written entirely in capital letters, which was Kanye's preferred style at the time. He said that South Park had murdered him the previous night. He said it had hurt his feelings. But he also said in the same post that he had been working on his ego and that he understood why the show had done what it did. He praised the writers. He said he was sure they were nice people in real life. He admitted on the record that the joke was funny. Then, the next year, Kanye released his album My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. On the song Gorgeous in 2010, he rapped a single line about the South Park writers. The line involved choking one of them with a fish stick. The line told the whole story. He had pretended to take it well. He had not actually taken it well. The episode had, in his own private opinion, been an attack he was still angry about a year later. Famously, the Fish Sticks episode aired several months before Kanye's most infamous public moment. In September of 2009, Kanye walked on stage during Taylor Swift's acceptance speech at the MTV Video Music Awards. He grabbed her microphone. He told the audience that Beyoncé had made one of the best music videos of all time. The moment became one of the most viral pieces of celebrity behavior in the entire decade. The Fish Sticks episode, which had aired 5 months earlier, had specifically been about Kanye's inability to laugh at himself. The episode had predicted, in a sense, the very behavior that would define his public image for years afterward. Tom Cruise was the other massive celebrity feud, although that one has already been covered in the Scientology section. The same pattern applied. The show made fun of him. He responded with anger and pressure. The pressure made him look worse. The episode became more famous, not less. Other celebrities played their parts in the same long-running pattern. Sarah Jessica Parker, the actress from Sex and the City, was mocked in the season 14 episode 200. Her response, given to Stylist magazine without naming the show directly, was to call this kind of personal criticism distasteful. She said that people thought it was funny to be mean. She called the practice uncivilized and vulgar. She said it was not good for anyone's soul. The complaint was thoughtful, but it landed badly. By framing the joke as cruel rather than laughing it off, she gave the moment a longer life than it would have otherwise had. Jennifer Lopez had her own appearance in 2003 in an episode where Cartman's hand becomes possessed by a parody version of her, complete with an exaggerated voice. Her reaction was reportedly cold. The episode was made worse, in her view, by the fact that Trey Parker had once worn a copy of one of her dresses to the 2000 Academy Awards. The dress in question was the famous green Versace that Lopez had made an iconic part of her career. Parker had worn a knockoff of it to the Oscars as a joke. Lopez was reportedly furious about both the dress and the episode. South Park, predictably, returned to mocking her in later seasons. In 2023, the show made an episode called The Worldwide Privacy Tour, which mocked Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the British royal couple. Rumors spread that the couple were planning to sue the show. No lawsuit ever materialized. The rumors themselves became part of the joke. The pattern held. Other famous figures have appeared, been mocked, and moved on with their lives in various ways. Elon Musk made a small public comment, calling his appearance trippy, before more or less ignoring the show. Russell Crowe, who was mocked in an episode that featured his cartoon counterpart riding around the world in a tugboat fighting people, reportedly hated the parody. Ben Affleck, Mel Gibson, Bono, James Cameron, Lorde, George R.R. Martin, Kim Kardashian, and dozens of others have all had episodes built around them. Most of them said something briefly in public. Most of them then quietly went went on with their careers. A few celebrities became repeat targets. Michael Jackson was mocked in multiple episodes. Paris Hilton appeared as a cautionary tale about modern celebrity culture. Britney Spears was depicted in an episode about the way the media destroys young female stars, which is one of the rare occasions when South Park's celebrity satire turned genuinely sympathetic. Caitlyn Jenner, after her public transition in 2015, was made into a recurring character. There are a small number of celebrities who have, by all available evidence, never reacted publicly to their appearances on South Park at all. Some of them probably never watched their episodes. Some probably watched them and decided silence was the smartest response. By staying quiet, those celebrities have proven in their own way that the show only really works on people who flinch. The deeper observation behind all of this, when looking at the long pattern, is that South Park is essentially running a public test. The show throws a dart at a famous person. The dart sticks. The famous person can either pull it out, look at it, laugh, and move on, or they can complain about the dart and watch the show throw a second one. The first response usually ends the story. The second response always extends it. After almost 30 years of doing this, Parker and Stone have collected an enormous catalog of evidence about how famous people react to public mockery, and that evidence has shown, again and again, that complaining about the joke makes the joke bigger. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one final cluster of South Park controversies left to cover. They are smaller individually than the ones already discussed. None of them got episodes banned. None of them caused international incidents. None of them ended a friendship. But the cumulative effect of all these smaller stories, the years of minor flare-ups and quiet adjustments, tells its own version of the show's history. The story of these forgotten moments includes a Christmas character being kicked out of town for being racist, an apology issued more than a decade after the original offense, a record-breaking use of a single curse word, and a real piece of footage that the network refused to allow on screen even after 20 seasons of South Park doing whatever it wanted. Section 10. The Forgotten Controversies and the Smaller Eruptions. Across nearly 30 years of South Park, almost 340 episodes have aired. The biggest controversies, the ones that end up on every list, account for maybe 10 or 12 of those episodes. The rest of them, the other 320 plus, have generated their own small flashes of trouble. Most of those flashes faded within a week. Some of them faded within a single news cycle. None of them rose to the level of death threats or international bans. But added together, they tell their own version of the show's story. They reveal the smaller, quieter ways the show has gotten itself into trouble, and the smaller, quieter ways the world has pushed back. The earliest of these forgotten controversies happened in the show's very first season. The episode was called Death. It aired on September 17th, 1997, just a month after the show began. The plot involves the boys trying to understand mortality, with the character of Death, depicted as a Grim Reaper, chasing Kenny throughout the episode. There was a side plot involving Stan and his older sister Shelly, who is constantly bullying him. The original cut of the episode contained a scene where Shelly, in her bullying of Stan, repeatedly set him on fire. She would douse him with water afterward, just enough to keep him alive, and then set him on fire again. The whole sequence was meant as cartoon violence, the same kind of thing Looney Tunes had done for decades. But the timing was bad. At that exact moment, the older animated show Beavis and Butthead was facing intense public backlash for a real-life incident in which a child had set his family's home on fire after seeing similar content on that show. Comedy Central, watching the Beavis and Butthead crisis unfold, decided that they could not afford a similar problem with South Park. The fire scene was deleted from the episode after the first airing. On later DVD releases, a small pool of water remained visible under Stan's character. On Blu-ray releases, even that pool was edited out completely. The episode that aired today is missing pieces that the original 1997 broadcast contained. A different kind of controversy came in 2001, with an episode called It Hits the Fan. The plot followed the boys as the word shit suddenly became acceptable on television. The episode used the word, in spoken form, 162 times in 22 minutes. The word also appeared in written form another 38 times. The total count was an even 200 uses of the word in a single episode of basic cable television. Comedy Central had agreed to let the word through as part of an experiment. Parker and Stone wanted to test something specific. They wanted to see what would happen if a curse word was used so many times that it lost all of its power. The result of the experiment was strange. The episode generated almost no controversy. There were no boycotts, there were no protest letters, the Catholic League did not get involved, the conservative watchdog groups who had complained about much smaller things said almost nothing. After After the episode aired, networks across the cable industry quietly relaxed their rules about the word. The experiment had worked. The word had been stripped of its meaning by overuse, and Parker and Stone had proven a point about how easily a taboo could be dismantled. The episode was a controversy that refused to become a controversy, which was, in its own way, the entire argument the writers had been trying to make. In 2007, a different episode took on a much heavier word. The episode was called With Apologies to Jesse Jackson, and it aired on March 7th of that year as the season 11 premiere. The plot was inspired by a real-life incident from the previous November, when the comedian Michael Richards, best known for his role as Kramer on the show Seinfeld, had a meltdown on stage at a Los Angeles comedy club called The Laugh Factory. Richards had repeatedly screamed a racial slur at black audience members who had been heckling him. The footage of the meltdown went viral. Richards apologized publicly through Jesse Jackson, the civil rights leader, in a series of awkward radio appearances. South Park took that situation and made it into an episode. In the show, Stan's father Randy goes on the real-life game show Wheel of Fortune. The puzzle category is People Who Annoy You. Randy gets to the final round. He has only one letter missing from the answer. Looking at the letters on the board, he is convinced he knows what the word is. The host gives him 5 seconds. Randy, in a panic, blurts out the racial slur. The audience is horrified. The correct answer, of course, was a much more innocent word. Randy spends the rest of the episode trying to recover from the public disaster. He tries to apologize to Jesse Jackson, who, in the cartoon, demands a literal physical act of submission to settle the matter. The episode used the slur 42 times total, 3 times by itself and 39 times in a compound form. Despite this, the episode generated almost no media attention. The line about Jesse Jackson not being the emperor of black people, delivered by the character of Token to Stan, was based on a real reaction by the show's biracial staff writer Vernon Chapman. Chapman had been frustrated by the way Richards had used Jackson, in real life, as a stand-in for the entire black community. The line landed in the cartoon as a real piece of personal frustration, transformed into a piece of dialogue. In 2006, an episode called Man Bear Pig debuted, with former Vice President Al Gore as the central guest. Gore, in the world of the show, was depicted as a desperate man chasing an imaginary monster called Man Bear Pig, half man, half bear, half pig. The monster was supposed to be a stand-in for climate change, the issue Gore had been campaigning on. The episode mocked Gore for what it presented as attention-seeking behavior. The cartoon Gore was needy, pathetic, and convinced that nobody was taking him seriously about a problem that, in the world of the show, did not exist. The episode aired about a month before Gore's documentary An Inconvenient Truth was released. The documentary went on to win the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. Climate change, in the years that followed, became one of the most well-supported scientific facts in modern history. The South Park episode, which had treated the issue as a delusion, aged badly. 12 years later, in 2018, Parker and Stone decided to do something they had almost never done before. They decided to apologize. The apology came in 2 new episodes called Time to Get Cereal and Nobody Got Cereal, both airing in November of 2018. In the new episodes, Man Bear Pig was real all along. The creature returned, attacking and killing residents of South Park. The boys realized they had been wrong. They sought out Gore, who had been waiting for their apology for over a decade. Gore, in the cartoon, made them grovel before he agreed to help. They apologized, sincerely, on screen. They told him the world would have been better if he had become president. Gore agreed to help them defeat the creature. Al Gore himself responded publicly. On The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, Gore called the new episodes a hell of a statement. He praised Parker and Stone for being willing to revisit their old position. The whole episode was, by South Park standards, an extraordinary thing. The show that almost never apologized had spent 2 full episodes making a public correction. In the same year, 2018, the show targeted one of its own oldest characters. The episode was called The Problem with Apu, and it aired on October 10th. The character at the center of the episode was Mr. Hanky, a small piece of sentient poop who had been a recurring Christmas character on South Park since the show's first season. Mr. Hanky had appeared in beloved episodes for years. He was, for many fans, one of the show's most charming creations. In The Problem with Apu, Mr. Hanky suddenly began posting offensive content on social media. His tweets were vile. He was racist. He was cruel. The town turned against him. He blamed his behavior on the sleep medication Ambien, the same defense the comedian Roseanne Barr had used in real life that year after she had posted a racist tweet about a former Obama administration official. Roseanne's show had been canceled because of that tweet. The South Park episode took that exact situation and applied it to Mr. Hanky. By the end of the episode, Mr. Hanky was exiled from South South Park. The townspeople wondered out loud where he could possibly go. The answer, given by Stan's father, was simple. There were still some places in the world that accepted racist, awful beings. Mr. Hanky rode out of town and arrived in the next scene in the fictional town of Springfield, the setting of the cartoon The Simpsons. He was greeted warmly by the residents of Springfield, including the character Apu Nahasapima Pedalon, who had been at the center of his own real-life controversy that year over claims that he was a racist stereotype. The episode ended with the on-screen hashtag #CancelTheSimpsons. The whole episode was, in part, a public attack on The Simpsons for refusing to address the Apu controversy seriously. It was also a strange kind of self-examination, with South Park acknowledging that one of its own beloved characters had aged poorly. Mr. Hanky returned to the show in later episodes, although the character was never quite the same. The Christmas episodes that had once been built around him largely disappeared from the rotation. Other smaller controversies dotted the show's history. The 2008 episode The China Problem featured a graphic sequence in which George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were depicted committing sexual violence against Indiana Jones, as a metaphor for what those filmmakers had done to the Indiana Jones character in the recent disappointing fourth movie of the franchise. The 2009 episode The Coon, which featured a parody of former Mexican President Felipe Calderón, was banned from airing in Mexico. Various episodes depicting other world leaders generated brief regional flare-ups in countries the show had targeted. Some of these smaller controversies came from inside the show's structure rather than from any outside source. The show's quick production cycle meant that mistakes happened. Episodes that worked in the moment sometimes aged badly. Episodes that were meant as one kind of satire were sometimes received as a different kind. The show's pattern of mocking everyone equally, which Parker and Stone have defended for decades as the core of their philosophy, has at times generated complaints from viewers who felt that the equal opportunity mockery was hiding a specific point of view underneath it. What ties all of these forgotten controversies together is the size of them. None of them stopped the show. None of them changed the show. None of them forced an apology, with the partial exception of the Al Gore reversal. They were, for the most part, small fires that the show walked through and kept moving. The bigger controversies, the ones at the top of this list, are the ones that left scars. The forgotten ones are the ones that healed quickly, leaving only the smallest of marks behind. Looking back at the entire pattern of South Park controversies, from the death threat that broke Comedy Central all the way down to the smallest forgotten episodes, one thing becomes clear. There has been only one force in the show's history that has ever managed to truly silence it. Not the Catholic League, not the Church of Scientology, not the Chinese government, not the Trump administration, not Tom Cruise, not Isaac Hayes leaving, not the loss of beloved characters, not the boycotts, not the lawsuits, not even the loss of an entire foreign market. The only force that ever made the show fully back down was the credible threat of physical violence, delivered through a single online post in April of 2010. And even then, the creators themselves did not actually back down. The network did. Comedy Central, without consulting Parker and Stone, censored a speech that was specifically about the danger of letting violent threats silence speech. The show had spent 2 episodes arguing against caving in to fear. The network caved in to fear anyway. The censored speech became the proof of the speech itself. That is the strange central truth of South Park. The show has survived everything. The Catholics could not stop it. The Scientologists could not stop it. The Chinese government could not stop it. The President of the United States could not stop it. Hundreds of celebrities could not stop it. The death of a cast member's voice could not stop it. The merger of 2 giant media companies could not stop it. The only thing that ever stopped a single piece of South Park from being seen as it was meant to be seen was the moment when a network executive looked at a posted threat, looked at his employees, looked at the building they all worked in, and decided that some words were too dangerous to broadcast. 28 years on, the show is still on the air. New episodes are still being made. The 50-episode deal signed in 2025 means that South Park will keep going at least through the end of the decade. Trey Parker is now in his mid-50s. Matt Stone is too. They are no longer the young men who shocked America with construction paper cutouts in 1997. They are veterans. They are, by some measures, the longest-running creators of an animated show in American history. And they are, despite everything, still making the same kind of trouble they were making at the beginning. The tools have changed. The targets have changed. The technology has changed, with deepfake animation now part of the show's toolkit. The money has changed, with billion-dollar contracts replacing the small budgets of the early years. But the core of the work has stayed the same. Make a thing, air the thing, see what happens. If someone gets angry, take note of what they were angry about. If someone laughs, take note of that too. Use the response as material for the next episode. episode. Keep going. The show has outlasted nearly all of its early enemies. Bill Donahue is still running the Catholic League, but his organization has far less cultural power than it had in 2005. The Church of Scientology has lost members and influence steadily over the years. Tom Cruise still makes movies, but his Mission Impossible threats now sit in the historical record as a strange piece of celebrity overreach. Isaac Hayes has been gone for years, mourned by Parker and Stone publicly and privately. The Chinese government's ban remains in place, but South Park has continued to make episodes about China without any change in tone. The world keeps changing around the show, and the show keeps surviving the changes. There is no obvious sign of when or how the run will end. There is no obvious sign that Parker and Stone will run out of things to fight about. There is no obvious sign that the audience, after 28 years, will get tired of watching them fight. What this list of controversies finally reveals more than anything is that South Park is not really a show about jokes. It is a show about what happens when you make a joke and refuse to apologize for it. The jokes themselves vary from brilliant to badly aged, from sharp to cruel, from inspired to lazy. But the refusal to apologize is constant. It is held through every single one of these stories. It has held through threats, through bans, through lost friendships, through lawsuits, through White House statements, through 28 years of changing cultural rules. The show has bent on rare occasions when its own creators have privately decided that they got something wrong. It has never broken. That, in the end, is the South Park story. A small group of people working in a small office in Los Angeles, making a cartoon about a small mountain town in Colorado, picking the biggest possible fights with the biggest possible institutions, and somehow, against all odds, walking away from every single one of those fights. Still on the air, still making episodes, still, after all this time, refusing to apologize. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.